Generally, people don't notice sound in films by the majority of filmmakers and film goers and audiences in general. And I say filmmakers, I use that cautiously because there is a certain echelon of filmmakers that truly understand what sound brings to them in terms of options and expressiveness and ways to elevate their film. But there are a lot of filmmakers who honestly just, well, here's this sound part of the process. Let's just do this and get it done with. And it goes in and comes out the other side. And they say, oh, it sounds great. Okay, let's go. But true great filmmakers like Chris Sanders are the people who I really enjoy working with because they understand the value of sound.
Let's start with The Wild Robot and
Okay.
your role on the film. If you can define that, what exactly your work consisted of, we can
Okay.
start with that and then sort of take it from there.
Mhm. Well, I'm part of a team. I work with Randy Tom, who is kind of an illustrious grand poobah in the world of sound and sound design. And he and I started working together a few years ago on the Super Mario Brothers movie. And we just kind of clicked. I think we complement each other. Our styles complement each other in a really good way. So I've done 5 projects with him since. We're currently working on 5/6 project together, and there's a third element to that. A guy named Lefferts who we're sort of a trio right now, and we complement each other very well. Although we're all very versatile in that we all do sound design, we all do supervision. The way that we dovetail each other is really kind of unique because Randy is more of a pastiche guy. He creates sound in a way that very creative. He sort of throws a lot of paint at the canvas, if you'll give me the visual metaphor. And then I'm more of a detail-oriented person, where I prep the tracks for to be mixed, and then Lef is on the other end in the mix as the mixer. So I sort of stand in this middle position of sort of air traffic controller in a way for primarily for sound effects. I don't deal with dialogue or music or anything like that. I just deal with the actual sounds of things making things. So I stand sort of in this middle area of sometimes I'm a sound designer, sometimes I create new sounds, sometimes I'm editing some of Randy's sounds, sometimes I'm triaging things from the editor, organizing things, getting it ready to be mixed. And that is short for a very complicated process of actually dealing with hundreds and thousands of assets to be culminated together in what becomes the final mix.
Yeah.
Now on Wild Robot, there's like first effects editors. I wasn't like the primary effects editor on Wild Robot. That was David Farmer, he's kind of industry legend as well. I think his first film was like the Lord of the Rings trilogy back in
Oh,
the
wow.
90s. Yeah, he's wonderful. I mean, he's just such a great, talented, and wonderful human being as well. This was actually my first time working with him, so I was really excited to work with him, and so it was a bit of a quad attack on this one, but the budget on this was actually lower, and David lives in Skywalker, which is in Marin. So it was cheaper for him to be the first effects editor because he was able to be there and he was able to set the stage. Whereas I worked from home here in Burbank, and I made things, and I was constantly online. Everything is Zoom these days. I'm on Zoom constantly all day long, just communicating and making things. And I have access to the Skywalker server here, So I, do my things and I put it on the server and it's ready there on the stage like almost immediately, and they integrate it, and it's like this back and forth communication that we have all day long, every day. So that's that was my involvement in Wild Robot. Specifically, the majority of my work on that movie was Roz's movements. Throughout the film, from start to finish, I dealt with all of the mechanics, all of the gears, all of the clicks and the eye blinks, the hand, every little detail that was associated with Roz. I put together as like the base, the core of her sound. And then after that, I just sort of went through and I made tons of sounds for everything. So like pretty much the second half of the movie, I did a lot of stuff on that. I was really focused on the ship and her going up into the ship and Travanta. Is that's
I
the
think so. I think so.
yeah, all
It
of her
sounds
scaly tentacles, and when she goes up into the ship, and when she's this is a spoiler stuff, so hopefully your
yeah,
readership
that's
has
fine.
seen the movie. But
Vantra. Vantra was
Vantra,
the
yeah, yeah.
yes.
I used to have a D&D character when I was a kid called Travanta, so I'm mixing that up. But yeah, all the stuff on the ship, all of the gun battles. So a lot of the actiony kind of stuff is the stuff that I primarily dealt with in the movie.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, you know, one of the things that being in this business myself, um, I've realized over the last 10, 15 years is that there's no substitute to the importance of sound, right?
Oh,
Because you can have a bad visual,
hmm,
you can have like even if you pull up like any of the tapes, like family videos from the 80s or 70s or 90s, or
yeah,
it may look crappy, but the audio does all the telling, right? Like
hmm,
the sound and effects. And I remember the very first time I realized the importance of sound, two times actually. One was Jurassic Park when they did the making of, like how they recorded all the
hmm,
dinosaur sounds with dolphins and a bunch of
hmm,
different animals. And then I saw a film from back home where I am from, and it was a really well done film about post 9/11 era.
hmm,
And the problem with that film was that it didn't have room tone. It didn't have footsteps. It didn't have
hmm,
somebody getting out of the bed and that noise that it makes. And that speaks so much volume, which comes to me to your point. If you took away all the Roz's clicks and, all those sounds and machine movement,
hmm,
if people will notice more than I probably notice now because it's there, because that really defines the character. So it's a very
hmm.
integral part of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting of you to say that. I have so many things to respond to that. Um, but the first thing I wanted to say is that generally people don't notice sound in films. That's a generalization, of course, but in my experience, coming from my perspective, where sound is everything, it is my craft, it is my art. I think about it constantly, and I have for 30 years now. It, it goes completely unnoticed by the majority of filmmakers and film goers and audiences in general. And I say filmmakers, I use that cautiously because there is a certain echelon of filmmakers that truly understand what sound brings to them in terms of options and expressiveness and ways to elevate their film. But there are a lot of filmmakers who honestly just, well, here's this sound part of the process. Let's just do this and get it done with. And it goes in and comes out the other side, and they say, "Oh, it sounds great. Okay, let's go." But true great filmmakers like Chris Sanders are the people who I really enjoy working with because they understand the value of sound. And when you're in those situations, it's just great because it is a collaborative effort. You're speaking the same language. You are talking about the details on a subliminal level, like the things that we do are largely subliminal. And you can tell because I took a afternoon and read a bunch of the reviews for Wild Robot, and there's a lot. Not only reviews like on Rotten Tomatoes, but like people posting videos of their opinions of the film, and everybody kind of says the same thing. Obviously, a lot of people really love the film, but for the most part, I don't think I heard a single person say a single word about the sound design or the sound effects, which is so bizarre to me because we put so much love and craftsmanship and detail, and we went back and forth and iterated like you wouldn't believe on the soundtrack of this film. And usually when people say something about the sound, they actually are talking about the score. So
Mm.
when I say people don't understand, the contribution of sound to film, that's kind of what I mean. It's like they know that there is a noise happening, but they don't give it the thought of where that noise
Wow.
came from, or and I think that goes back to the olden days when if when people made a film, they recorded the things on set, and that was what went into the final print for the most part. But that stopped in the 80s, I think. And now, pretty much everything that you hear in a film is a fabrication, is a recreation of, um, or an artistic interpretation of what it could have sounded like on set.
Yeah, no, it's again like I say this all the time, even like when I'm on set, whether it's directing a film or doing some sort of brand work for a company. For
Mm,
me, picking up a glass, even if there's music
mhm,
playing, I want to hear something in the back
mhm,
because even if people don't get it, it's just
mhm,
like they will feel that their glass is being lifted from a counter and being put on the table or a tap is turning on. And I learned this one on my first film. I understood something that was very. It was not a visual thing, but it was not a sound thing, but also a visual thing. I
mhm.
did this film, political social film. I'm not going to get into that, but there were a lot of
I
great.
saw some trailers of the work that you've done, so I'm
Oh,
aware
okay.
of your films.
Okay. Great. Awesome. So I, did all these beautiful visuals of scenic locations, mountains, and we screened the film, bunch of screenings, and I showed it to my sister.
Mhm,
And so I'm like, so what did you think? And I thought she was gonna say it's a great story, it's a great visuals, and she goes, I only liked one thing that stood out to me. I'm like, really? What is that? A woman cutting vegetables and the sound that it made. And I was like, holy crap, why? And then it made sense. It's about relevance. It's
mhm,
about people relating to those little things because she probably cut vegetable and she hears the sound and it
mhm,
went into her brain more effectively than anything else. So again, sound has is so important and it sucks that people don't notice it. But at
mhm.
the same time, I think it's a compliment to you that if you took the sounds out, then people will notice it.
That's true, and that's been a thing throughout, a thread throughout my life. Coming to the realization that sound is an invisible art. We as craftsmen, we want to create things that are appreciated, obviously, but in sound, you kind of got to let that go because when we are at the peak of our craft and we're doing a very good job, the end result is that people don't even know that you've treaded these
Yeah.
grounds, right? So, and so to that effect, I think what we did with Wild Robot um, is really an accomplished job. I think
It
that
is.
what we did was quite good, and I definitely think it was a benchmark in my career. Um, just because being able to service such a great story. Um, you don't get that very often, and even less often to get to work on something that um, mirrors what you want to put out into the world. That's kind of one of the best things about working on the Wild Robot for me was that, it's like I grew up when I was younger, I worked in video games, and I found myself working on all of these things that I would never want my children to play. And it wasn't that I was, embarrassed of the stuff that I was doing. It was just
I
one of
get
those
it.
things where I didn't feel like I was contributing anything constructive to the world. And so
Right.
for for that overlap to happen where I feel really good about what I'm putting into the world with these things, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. I'm glad to hear that. So going to Wild Robot, the sound effects that you're talking about, and
Mm,
what is it? I probably know partially, but for the audience, what is the process of you working on those sounds? Is it when it's going through storyboarding stage, or is it more towards the completion? And how do you record those sounds if that's, you know, and mixing them up just without getting technical, just in a very similar, summarized way, if you can
mhm.
explain that.
Sure. Randy is a great proponent and evangelist for this concept of um, starting sound design early, starting it at the conceptual phase. And it makes such a difference when you do that, when you have somebody thinking about your film on the script level of being able to edit the script to accommodate for sound participating in the narrative. Um, and he's really amazing at that. I've read some of his script doctoring where he's come up with ideas, and I've been in spotting sessions where he'll come up with an idea for these psychological tricks of like repeating a sound from one part of the movie to another part of the movie where a character is having a realization. And like those are the kinds of things that about
Wow.
the art and the craft of sound that I learned so much when I work with Randy because he's really got his eye on or his ear, forgive me, on that concept of film of sound elevating a film in such a way that it is an integral part of the story. So on Wild Robot, I think he was involved pretty early. He and Chris Sanders have had a relationship for a long time. Randy did How to Train Your Dragon. I don't know if he did Lilo and Stitch. I think he probably did. Um,
Mm.
but they had this rapport for many years. And so when it came down to the team coming on board and attacking this thing and, getting into the meat of it and getting it done, that's where I came in. So I'm not completely aware of the conversations that happened prior to that part. But from my part on, it was like I was dumped in and Randy said, okay, I want you to own Roz. So I was like, okay, cool. So I spent a few days recording things. I went out and bought some props. I bought some bike pumps, um, and then I have a really nice set of tools, just like Spicoli's dad. Um, Fast Times at Ridgemont High reference. Sorry if that's
That's
before
okay.
your time.
That's okay.
No, so I've got all this great set of tools, and so I basically sat here with the microphone and recorded, bike pump hisses, so get pneumatic things, vice grips, like whatever I could sort of come in and grab. So I had this set of like building blocks for her, and everything that is in Roz in her core layers is all of that stuff that I originally recorded. And I piece it together and I work in, it's called SoundMiner. And SoundMiner has a sampler base where you can layer things on it. It's called Radium. And that's like pretty much my primary sound design tool these days. But I layer sounds up. I'll do all the tweaking and things until what I have in my head matches what I'm hearing out of the speakers. So
That
that's kind of how Roz came about.
that's lovely, man. Something I just thought of. We're talking about sound, whether it's in relation to Wild Robot or just in general.
Mhm.
Have you ever had a conversation with somebody who is visually impaired? and for them, sound is probably the only thing that
No, but I
speaks.
think about them a lot. I think about how Stevie Wonder is like one of the greatest musicians of all time. It's like there's that deficit that because he has no vision, he compensates with just this incredible oral magic, and I do believe that to that extension, I believe that people, different people relate to the world in different ways. A lot of people relate to the world visually. I am definitely a person that relates to the world audibly or orally or whatever. Just because that has been the way that I have created the channels in my brain since I was a kid. I grew up in a household. My dad was a woodworker and a furniture builder, and he built speakers because he was also a bit of an audiophile. And so my childhood was listening to records and radio, and um, I liked visual arts, but for me, everything that I gravitated to was auditorily. And I think, as a rule, we connect with things emotionally through our ears. I, although when you're making a movie, as you know, the visuals cost everything. you know, to create a believable visual, that's where all of the money goes. But to to get into an audience head, to get into their heart, you have to do it through their ears.
That's a nice quote. You should put that up online somewhere. It's really well said. It's true. It's true because I mean, we live in the era of podcasts right now, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you live at people listen to audiobooks. It's sound. Everything is sound around us. Like even when we go out for a hike or, yeah,
Yeah.
the visuals are breathtaking, but you hear these birds making sound, the trees, you know,
Hmm.
falling on the ground. Sound, 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 sound is very important.
Yeah.
I going to your beginning, and I'll come back to Wild Robot again. You kind of touched upon it right now, but was it your dad's work that kind of clicked you that I want to go into sound and then also into film and sound? Like, was there a specific catalyst that triggered all this journey that you have been on and you're still on?
Uh, I think there's a lot of things. It was a continuum of things that attracted me. But earlier you had mentioned like the 8 millimeter film, family films and stuff like that. And we definitely had those. And I would watch them, when I was 6 or 7 years old. And I would watch them, and it was just like, it was weird to see my younger self moving around on film, but there was no sound on these 8 millimeter films. And, to me, it was just like, I didn't quite understand why it felt so weird and off. But I think Star Wars was pretty much the first filming experience that I had that sort of opened my eyes to like this audible connection to media, to visual media. Um, and it wasn't actually Star Wars; it was the record that came out like a year later called "The Story of Star Wars," which was like an expanded audio recreation of Star Wars that Ben Burtt put together, and it was far more sound focused. I mean, the music was there, and I love the music. Who doesn't
Of
love?
course.
As a pre, I was 7 years old when Star Wars came out, so and everybody, all my friends, we were just like Star Wars obsessed. We all had the little action figures, and so when that album came out that Ben Burtt did, it was like sort of a journey, a sonic journey into that world, and it worked, man. It was just like, we don't need the visuals. I already have a visual, the imprint of what these characters look like in my head, but we were listening to it, and it had the same exact fulfillment, the same enrichment, the same story, the same. but it was cooler. And then a little while later, somehow I saw that documentary. I think it's kind of infamous now of, Ben Burtt like banging on the the wires to get the blaster sounds. And it was like, wow, man, that is really cool. So I compartmentalized that. But then I got into music. When I was like 12, I started no, actually, I started playing trumpet when I was like 10 or 11. And then I graduated into playing electric guitar because that was the coolest thing ever to a 10 year or 11-year-old kid.
I bet.
And yeah, so then I did a musical journey for a really long time. Went and I ended up getting my degree in jazz performance, of all things. So
Wow.
really into jazz, yeah. But then, so my first foray into production was a couple years out of college. I was, you know, on the road with a reggae band, and I had met my to be wife, and I realized that if I ever wanted to have with her a life with her, I was going to have to do something different than being on the road with a reggae band. So I hooked up with some friends. They were starting a multimedia company and they needed audio and music. And I was just like, hey, I would love to do that. And so I started making music for them and they're like, well, we need these sound effects. And I was just like, okay, how would I do that? And it was like it was like the clouds opened up for me because it was like I grabbed my wife and we were like hanging out in the closet in our apartment with with a Shure SM57, saying things into the microphone and making like sound effects. And it was just like, oh, this is terrible. I got to figure out how to do this like for real. you know so
Yeah.
that started that whole journey of trying to figure out what sound design was and how I was going to fit into that story. And yeah, it's been a long journey, and it's a constant journey. I'm always learning to this day. Everything I'm learning something new every day, and that's kind of a great thing.
That's beautiful, man. And it's interesting that partially your journey where it kind of got initiated with Star Wars and now the universe has brought you to Skywalker Ranch, which is part of
Yeah.
Skywalker is Luke Skywalker and or Lucasfilms and all that. I don't know who owns it now. I have no idea because everybody gets bought out by somebody. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
you're working at Skywalker Sound and everything, and that's amazing.
Yeah,
Uh,
I finally got to meet Ben Burtt last
okay,
year. There were no, actually, it was over the holidays. Yeah, so it was last year. It was
yeah.
they do a breakfast on a holiday breakfast, and I had just happened to be there when Ben was, and Lef, he's like, I was like, dude, could you introduce me to Ben Burtt? He's like, you haven't met Ben? Oh, let's go over here. So I was just like, I was really nervous, and it was just because, he's been kind of a hero for the majority of my
Wow.
life, the vast majority of my life. And he was just such a sweetheart. Lef introduced me as like, hey, this is the guy that worked with us on Super Mario and Ultraman. And he's like, Super Mario and Ultraman? Wow, man. That's quite a Japanese resume you got there.
That's amazing. That's a great response. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, that must have been nice.
it was. Yeah,
That's super cool, man. That's really good. I really enjoy, listening to stories like these more than about the film. But it's because, people forget about everybody's journey. Everybody thinks that, you've made it overnight to where you are. I mean, it's a long journey that, it goes
oh,
through zigs
yeah.
and zags and ups and downs and left and center and everything. And it's so good to hear that, that you've made that journey from beginning of Star Wars in 77, having that realization it should be where you are today, and a lot more to go for sure. Um,
Well, I hope so. Yeah, I've been through the thick of it. Doing sound it's been a struggle. Like I told you earlier, I got my start in video games, and that was the early days of video games. It's certainly not the what we think of as video games today. I was doing like adventure games, and do you remember Myst?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I worked on the third Myst, which
Oh,
I really,
nice.
yeah, I really liked that era of video games, like adventure games. They were non-violent, and I've always been sort of a pacifist, but um, I really liked that aspect. And then the company that I worked for 6 years went out of business, unfortunately. So I went out on my own and started freelancing. And my first client that I landed was Epic Games,
Oh,
and
nice.
they make like Unreal
Yeah.
Tournament and Gears of War and all those games. And so all of a sudden I was out of my comfort zone of doing like fun non-violent things into like straight up battle, running down the halls killing these guys, and so it's just like sort of that was my thing for a little while. But after I did all of the Gears of War trilogy, I did the one, two, and three, and then after that, it was just sort of like, if I'm ever gonna get into film, um, I got to do it. I got to just make that move. And so we moved to LA and started hitting that road. It took 8 years from the time that we moved to LA for me to land my first studio feature. And that was 8 years of doing my game thing so that I could make money
Of
because I
course.
was I was working on independent films at night and short films and indies and whatever I could get into to get that experience and to start really learning the language of film sound because it is very different than game sound. And
Yeah.
so, I had to pay my dues for 8 years. But then I did get into the studio system. And, it's like my first film was Total Recall, which I was in high heaven with that because it was such a
The
beautiful,
Colin Farrell one, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was such a
Yeah.
beautiful film. It didn't do so well, but when we were working on it, it was very exciting because, we started. I was working with Stephen Flick on that one, who was like
Mm.
another hero of mine. He did RoboCop, and he did, like the original Verhoeven movies. So he was already like an established hero of mine. So the opportunity to work with him, I didn't care what we were doing, but just being able to work with him was great. So we did Total Recall, and the it started out with green screen. Everything was green screen, and like these cars on stilts and everything. It was just like this is so weird. But then as the final visuals started coming in, it was like, wow, this is really cool. And for a sound designer at my age, at that time, at that stage in my development, it was like a dream because it was all like these cool sci-fi things, and I was able to make really cool stuff, and and work with Steve, and Steve was egging me on, and I was starting to egg him on, and we were like not competitive, but just sort of like this fun back and
Yeah.
forth of like how cool can we make this thing sound, you know? And
Yeah.
so yeah,
No,
and
that was a sorry, go on.
please go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that was a good film, and I saw it again recently. I think Kate Beckinsale was in it too, if I'm not
Oh yeah,
mistaken. Yeah, I think
yeah,
they shot most of it in Toronto, where I am, and it wasn't that bad of a film. I mean, it wasn't Oscar worthy, but I just thought it was really well done, and yeah,
mhm,
sure, it had problems here and there, but the idea, the concept, and then also the execution, again, sci-fi and sound, you can't have one or one or the other without each other. So yeah,
yeah,
good stuff,
yeah.
man.
Well, thank you. It's like when you work on these things, you put your everything into it. From the moment you wake up to the moment you pass out. It's just like every day you're just doing your best with a lot of like enthusiasm and creativity and craft work. And when I was in the thick of that film, there was like no question in my mind that it was like the greatest film ever, and
Of
I'm gonna win
course.
an Oscar for this thing.
Oh yeah, we all do that.
Yeah,
We all do that for every film that we make. I'm gonna be on the
yeah.
stage accepting the Oscar.
Yeah, so that's the fantasy. But and then it went out, and it was just sort of like reviewers hate it and all this stuff. It was just like, what? I don't get it.
Yeah.
But you do a couple dozen films after that, and you realize that it's the same thing for every movie. So you just
Yeah,
sort of get
yeah,
used to it.
yeah. No, I get it, man. Let me just kind of wrap it up with Wild Robot, which is actually uh, uh, people can rent and own it on streaming platforms. I didn't realize it until yesterday. I forgot about it.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
understand why they're doing that.
yeah, and then it's going to be on DVD, I think, in a couple of months. I think they figured out some sort of a path, all these studios, that they release it online after a couple of weeks for rent and
Mm,
purchase, and then they do
mm.
the DVD. But what was one of the biggest challenges that you can think of a story while working on Wild Robot or creating sounds of Roz? I read in the book, I don't know if it was you who said it or somebody else said it, The Art of Wild Robot, that it took 2 years to create Roz's sound to the way it is right now. So just any of the challenges or one of the challenges
Mhm.
that you came across.
That was probably Randy. Randy does
Okay.
all of the publicity for the shows that we work on. Thank God, because I don't mind doing, podcasts or whatever, but I don't do a ton of publicity. But like I said, I wasn't really aware of what Randy did prior to my coming on. But there was a lot of conversation about you know sounds like mouth sounds for Roz and things like that. Um, and I used some of the sounds that Randy recorded for that, but they weren't like prominent sounds, I don't think, because a lot of we originally had this conversation about abandoning servos, which for robot design, I've done a ton of robots in my life. Um, you know, m- um, and it's like how you make things expressive is through like shaping the sounds of servos. Like if she twists her head, it's good to have a sound that goes, like a subtle, like kind of upward turn to it, because it gives that motion validity. Um, and so my first pass, like I did reel one, the first reel of the film, and I just kind of did my thing. He sort of mentioned that he wanted it to be less servo-y, so I had that in my mind, but I attacked it like how I felt Roz should sound. Because that's what we do. It's like he works with me because I have something to say. And I feel like if I didn't say what I wanted, then that's doing him a disservice because he doesn't have my perspective to bounce around in his head. So I did my thing, and it included servos. Not to a great extent. I was shying away from it, but so and then I submitted it to him, and he listened to it, and he's like, "Yeah, it's very delicate and interesting, but I really want to stick to this ethos of no servos because I want to do something different, from every other robot that we've done." So that was a big challenge for me because he took away from me what I was using to make those expressions, which was a wonderful blessing because it stretched my mind into thinking about how I could achieve that expressiveness without using that crutch. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
by doing that, it put me into like a far more creative space where I was like searching for things and I was trying to come up with a way to do this. And my way of doing that was through bike pumps, through manipulating the output of a, as I push the air through the bike pump, I would, I would create little things on on the tips of it to like change the dynamic of how the air was released. Um, and I was able to come up with expressive ways of pushing air through a nozzle. So it served the purpose twofold. It did an expressive sound without servos, and it stuck to the more pneumatic approach that Randy was looking for. So my second approach, when I gave it to him, he was like, "Yep, that's it." So then I did the rest of the movie after that with
Wow.
that concept.
That's so cool, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, I know I said this like 5 times already, but I y- cannot stress enough the importance of sound in general, but specifically in this film. When I saw it at TIFF. I think it was like early September, and saw it in IMAX theater, and it was just, the music is one thing, sound design is another thing, but just hearing all these sounds, especially of Roz, really popped out. And I saw it once, and I'm gonna watch it again and again. It's one of my favorite animated, if not, in the top three for sure,
Wow.
ever made for me. It's just the story, and it was just like one of those perfect films.
Wow.
And thank you so much for being part of it. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
well,
because
that's so wonderful to hear. Thank you for the praise on behalf of everybody that put their souls into the film. That's such a wonderful compliment. It's really,
yeah,
really nice to hear.
no, I'm glad that you guys did a phenomenal job. And like you said, nobody goes out to, when they make a movie, whether you're a sound or cinematographer, or director, or writer, you don't start a movie by thinking of the idea in your head that I'm going to make a bad movie. Everybody wants to make a great movie.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff happens. Sometimes the script, sometimes the studio, whatever, and or
Hmm.
sometimes it's timing. But this was just, everything was spot on. And thank you so much again for making it. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I truly enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, it's been really great talking about it. I don't get to talk about this stuff to people very often, so it's fun.
Well, you're welcome anytime for any more of the past or upcoming work. I would love to have you again because I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Very cool. Thanks so much, man.
My pleasure, man. Thank you so much, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Bye bye.